Okay, I think we will try and get started. Everybody kind of settle in here. So my name is Alison Lechon. I am the chair of the Route 28 Citizens Advisory Committee. Can everybody hear me? I realize I don't have a mic,
There is one behind you.
come on up front.
Allison, there's one right behind you if you want to use it.
Oh,
I
do have a mic.
Just flip the switch.
how's that? Better? Okay. Now I don't have to yell. That's great. So I'm Alison Lechon. I'm the chair of the Route 28 Citizens Advisory Committee, and in a minute I'll introduce the rest of the committee here, but I first wanted to just kind of back up and recall the history that got us here today. So the water main needs to be replaced along T-Ticket Highway, along Route 28, and the section from Main Street to Oxbow Road is slated to be done in the next few years, I guess. And because that's a state highway, Route 28, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, or MassDOT, has to approve any project that happens on that roadway, and that's no matter what the funding source is. They require, in turn, something called complete streets, which we'll hear a little bit more about in a few minutes, but basically it's meant to ensure that all road users, not just motor vehicle users, have safe access to the roadway. And for a road with the speed and number of vehicles per day of that stretch of T-Ticket Highway, their kind of absolute guidelines are quite extensive, calling for separated bike and pedestrian lanes on both sides of the highway. When the project engineers drew that up, a lot of people reacted strongly to the effect that a project like that would have on the aesthetics and the feel of that stretch of highway, and on a number of the front yards along there, many of which are already quite shallow. Basically, while not involving any land takings, that rendering would have taken up pretty much all of the 60-foot right-of-way there. And when the DPW presented that plan at a public meeting October 25th, a large crowd turned out objecting not only to the specifics of the project, but also to the process. They felt that there had not been enough opportunity for public input into what was going to happen. So in response, the selectmen put out a call for volunteers to serve on a committee to come up with a compromise proposal that would still provide safe access for bikes and pedestrians, and also hopefully satisfy most residents and satisfy MassDOT, which does, as it turns out, offer some flexibility on their guidelines when responding to local needs. And just whenever I say pedestrians, I also mean wheelchairs, strollers, kind of any other non-motorized vehicle uses of a path. So about 15 people applied, I think it was, to be on that committee, and the select board appointed 9 of us. And I'll introduce everybody now, along with their affiliation, if they have any. So starting on my left here is Ben Harden. He's the Falmouth Bikeways Committee rep. Then I've got Rachel Howard, who is an abutter. She's also our recording secretary. Then I've got Greg Berkeley, who happens to be a traffic engineer, which was very handy. Mary Berry. Jim Marshall, who many of you probably know, he's an abutter. He was also the vice chair of the committee. Then I've got John Sylvia, sorry, misprint. David Vieira, the T-Ticket, our state rep of the T-Ticket area, was an ad hoc member. Got Charlotte Harris, who was the planning board representative. Am I missing anybody else who's not sitting right there? Okay, that's great. So committee's been great. We've, I think, worked pretty well together. I also want to introduce the staff from the town. Where's Ray? Oh, they're way in the back there hiding is Ray Jack, the director of Falmouth DPW. Is that right? Yeah, and then Peter McConerty, the deputy director, is right here. And then we've got the project engineer from Tata and Howard, Pat O'Neill, right here, who, now this is the firm that was hired by the town to draw up these plans. So, and the three of them, all the engineers were at every meeting, including our site visit, so that they could offer technical advice like, yes, that'll work, it won't work, yes, we think MassDOT will go for that, no, we don't think they will, so that we, what we present today is a fairly, doable, should be doable in terms of both technical engineering and also acceptance by the state, hopefully. So we've had 4 Thursday evening meetings starting January 17th. We also spent the better part of a Saturday walking the entire stretch of the site, marking up the plan. All these meetings, of course, were, duly advertised, open to the public, covered in the enterprise, and several were covered by FCTV as well. They're here tonight, obviously, or today. The minutes for all but this past Thursday's meeting have been posted on the town website. And we always welcomed public comment from people who attended, and we're happy to have participation by a few of the people who I see in the audience tonight. So next I want to describe the plan for today. Dave Vieira and I will make a presentation that sort of sets the context, explains a little bit about complete streets and what our process was for coming up with a draft plan. Then we'll actually show that draft plan up on the screen, section by section, kind of like what some of you were looking at across the street. And we'll welcome your input here. If there are issues or questions that come up that we can't answer right away, but we don't want to lose track of, I'll note them on this easel. I call that the parking lot. Next, and then finally, if you want to get a closer look or talk with us or the engineers about a particular section, these drawings, as most of you have seen, they're actually not hanging on the walls, they're now on the tables across the tables in the cafeteria. And so when we're done in here, we can move over there. There are sticky notes provided for you to make little notes and stick it right on the appropriate part of the plan. There's just pieces of paper to put general comments on. And if you need to leave early, you can feel free to do that on your way out as well. And our next committee meeting is scheduled, just so you know, for this coming Thursday evening at 7 in Town Hall, in the old water room, which is when you go in the main door to your left down the hall. We'll be discussing what we hear today and the written comments that we receive, and we'll be making changes as appropriate. And again, you're welcome to attend. And at the end of that meeting, depending on how much new stuff comes in, we'll make the call about whether we need to have further meetings or whether it's ready to send back to the engineers. And the hope is to have our final recommendations delivered to the town by mid-April. Just a request, because I know that feelings have been a little high around this issue. A reminder that we're all volunteers who offered our time because we care about our town. And we wanted to come up with a plan that offers a reasonable compromise between doing nothing, which is not an option, and what the original plan had called for. So while still accommodating bikes and pedestrians safely, we also did our best to accommodate specimen trees, so the older, more really cool trees, shallow front yards, other obstacles, in general to respond to the concerns that we heard at that October meeting. We also advocated for additional landscaping, whether that be replacing unhealthy trees that will be removed or adding screening for residences. Some of the slides we'll show you will illustrate how a project like this can actually improve the aesthetics of a road. We did our best, but we could well have overlooked some things or got some things wrong. That's why we're seeking your input today. So we welcome your comments. I just request that they be offered in a constructive and informative spirit. Any questions before we start on the presentation about how today will go, the process? Okay, Dave, you want to dive in? We're going to sort of tag team this. We haven't rehearsed it, so.
Thank you, Alison. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I want to thank Ray and the department and the Board of Selectmen for taking the concerns of the village seriously and going to this hypersensitive level of us literally walking up and down this corridor with the plans, the existing plans, and with meeting neighbors in their front yards and in front of their businesses to talk about what this can look like going forward. So this is kind of unique. A lot of times these things are done, as the preliminary designs were done, they're done in offices and they're done by paid professionals. And so the collaborative effort, I think, between the residents, citizens, business owners is unique, and hopefully by the end of the next couple of months we'll have a product that we can all be proud of, one that we can support, and one that we'll be able to put on the funding cycle for what they call the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. So as Alison said, we're going to do a brief presentation of Complete Streets just to give it some context. The Complete Streets training is a multi-day training. I actually went and attended after this committee was appointed, the Mass DOT training in Plymouth, and then took their full training of I think 200 and some odd slides, and we put it down to about 60 slides, and we did a presentation with the committee. Today you'll see about 20 of those slides as an overview of that. But really, what is Complete Streets? And as Alison said, Complete Streets is this concept, a model, where when you are redesigning rights of way, you are looking at all of the users within the right of way. And how can you accommodate their safe, efficient travel, whether it's in a vehicle, in a wheelchair, on foot, on a bicycle, or pushing a stroller. And so folks have different points of view as to what, if you're in a car, you want to get from point A to B as quickly as possible. You don't want to have to stop too often. You don't want a lot of folks cutting out in front of you, so you don't have safety issues to worry about. If you're a pedestrian and you're walking from point A to B, you also want to get there as efficiently as possible, but you don't want traffic being so aggressive and fast that it's a threat to your safety at crossings and things like that. So different users have different needs. We talked about shading and trying to help some residents that are close to the corridor. Well, if you're a resident on Route 28, you probably want some buffering from the road. If you're a business, you probably don't want that, because you want folks to see your business, know where it is, and come and frequent your business. So different users of the right-of-way have different points of view as to what the best use is. So for pedestrians, we looked at the multimodal paths. We looked at existing sidewalks. Some of you were at the previous hearings where I mentioned that when we had a problem in T-Ticket a number of years ago, we went to have the state fix the sidewalk, and they go, it's not our responsibility anymore. We're like, well, why is that? Well, because the selectmen way back, when the state said we would build sidewalks from Davis Straits towards the Mashpee town line, assumed responsibility and ownership of the sidewalks. Unusual, but the 3-member full-time Board of Selectmen at the time said, bring the sidewalks, we'll take care of them from here on out. And so going forward, we're hoping to look at that relationship with the state as well to see what is the future operation and maintenance of these sidewalks or multimodal paths as they're developed and put into place. But for pedestrians, high traffic volumes and speeds intimidate some users. If folks don't feel safe walking down the corridor, they won't walk. They'll find other ways to get from point A to B. Heavy traffic intersections can result in high delays to cross. We've got a couple of big intersections within this area, most notably at the Mara Vista extension. And so looking at sort of the curb cuts on there, for those of you that have been to that intersection and actually looked at it, when you come in, there's one general curb cut that comes for pedestrians coming in 2 different directions to the corner. If you look at all of our other intersections that have been upgraded already in the corridor, we have a curb cut when you're coming from the east and a curb cut when you're coming from the north. And so for pedestrians that are either on foot and trying to make it into the crosswalk, or for those that might be in a wheelchair or pushing a stroller, being able to have a directional access directly into the sidewalk from the sidewalk into the crosswalk is important. And so those types of minor upgrades in the corners are important as we look at the intersections going forward. Gaps in the network or poor connectivity between local streets. You'll see how this plays out later on when we talk about the design. We looked at really how does this corridor that the committee was looking at play into the larger network of transportation in East Falmouth and in Falmouth as a whole. And there's a lot of connectivity points on the south side of Route 28 that bring folks into the 28 corridor and then bring them either to the center of the village or bring them out towards the East Falmouth village. Not so many on the north, but there are some on the north, but there aren't as many connections on the north. There's a lot of residents and businesses, there's a couple of small developments, but these main connectors of the network are something that we had to be cognizant of, and we need to continue to be cognizant of moving forward if we're not looking at this as just a small portion of East Falmouth, but really as a connector piece for all of East Falmouth moving into the center of town. So this is one of the graphics that kind of shows us sidewalks that are ADA compliant. Now here are sidewalks that are also ADA compliant. But when we look at the markings, if you look at the left hand corridor there, you see the painted markings on the sidewalks. This is that directional curb cut that I spoke about, so that the individuals are going right down into the crosswalk versus being dropped off on an angle. Whoop. On the far right, compliant sidewalk. On the far right here, compliant sidewalks but with buffer. So when large trucks or vehicles are moving fast down the corridor, pedestrians are more comfortable, particularly young children and folks that might have some mobility issues, being separated and not being directly on the curb of the Route 28 corridor. So while they're both compliant, what's the better design? Alison, do you want to take over?
Sure. Yeah. So just a little bit of background about why separated lanes, in addition to what Dave just talked about for pedestrians. When you look at some statistics about biking in the country in Massachusetts, 52% of all trips are less than 3 miles, which many people could manage on a bike. But only 2% of those trips are actually taken by bike. So why is that? Well, among suburban Massachusetts residents, 50% would like to walk or bike to work, but only 1% are comfortable biking with traffic, like in the, on the road with traffic. So there's a big gap there between potential to take cars off the road and turn them into bikes or pedestrians, and the number of people who are actually comfortable doing that under existing conditions. And among the 50% that would like to bike, only 7%, so not that big a jump, are comfortable on a non-separated lane. So basically a fog line that gives them a little bit of space at the side of a road, but they're still sharing that road with traffic, versus 60% being comfortable on a separated path. So you can see that, we have the potential, if we take the bikes and the pedestrians off the roadway itself, to really increase the number of people using that and getting them out of their cars. So why? Why do we care about that? Well, obviously it's healthy. We've got kids we've got a lot of kids, as Dave just alluded to, in those neighborhoods along there. We've got 2 elementary schools along that area. Right now, very few people, I think, could safely, feel safe about walking with their kids or biking with their kids to school. This could potentially make that possible. Every person who's on a bike is a person who's not in a car and not in your way and not taking your parking space. So, and on Cape Cod, especially in the summer, obviously that's a big issue for all of us. Obviously, it's a lot less, again, it's another vehicle not emitting carbon and other pollutants into the atmosphere. And when you get people out of cars walking their dogs, walking with their kids on their bikes. It brings it down to a person-to-person level. There tends to be more personal interactions with neighbors, with other people, so it can really help build community. The economy, there are a lot of statistics that show that even if bikers tend to spend less per trip to a store, they take more trips to the store. And so they end up patronizing more than drivers. And providing easy access by bike makes it, you don't even think twice. It's like you're not thinking, oh, I don't want to deal with the traffic, I'm not going to bother shopping. And also, of course, locally, the bottom photo, we have a lot of J1 workers in the summer, and we have a lot of other people who would love to commute. Some do it now, taking their life in their hands, but it would open up the possibility for a lot more people to commute from East Falmouth either into town or even all the way to Woods Hole. So it has a lot of economic benefits. And it also just becomes more of a draw for younger people moving here, people with families. It really can increase the quality of life. Again, why separated bike lanes? Hopefully we have less of the upper left picture occurring there. And also as a driver, if the bike has nowhere to go, you get stuck behind that bike. It can be annoying. It's like, oh, come on. If we're out of the road, then you don't have to, we're not in your way, basically. So it makes it less stressful for everybody, for drivers as well as the bikers. And again, of course, the traffic issue. So hopefully this is the beginning. Dave again talked a lot about the networks, and that this is a kind of a key component of what we hope gradually over the years will become a network of making bicycling a viable transportation option in Falmouth for all the benefits that it entails. And you can see with this graphic from Kingston, that I think New York, I'm not sure, but that it can, you can really use it to market your town. So I'm going to hand it back over to Dave here.
So we've got a few slides, a few graphics to show you some pre-existing conditions on projects in Massachusetts prior to the complete streets, and then what the design looked like after the implementation. So in the top corner there, you had a business district, you had 2 lanes of travel, no sidewalks, no multi-use path. Bottom right, you see some mixed-use development brought into the region. You see a tree-lined corridor with buffer zones. I don't know about you, but I would much rather frequent or live in an area that looked like the bottom right than the top left. And I grew up in the top left, right? 221 T-Ticket Highway. They paved Paradise and put up a parking lot, right? Now it's the T-Ticket Park or the parking lot, but I grew up right in this corridor, and I grew up when there were trees in the corridor, and then the trees came down. Some of them got sick. Some of them had to be cut down so that we could put what the state wanted then as the sidewalks, with the expansion of Route 28. And we ended up with a lot more asphalt, a lot more granite curbs, and a lot less green space and a lot less trees. Here's another example. You have an intersection here, pedestrian intersection. There is a compliant, although probably a little out of repair, sidewalk on the right-hand side here. Bottom right, you have a multi-use path. You have a separated boulevard corridor. And if you look at the crossing itself for the pedestrians, where the pedestrians had a one long shot cross, they now have the ability to cross to the center section. And so for folks that might take a little bit of time to get across all these 4 lanes of highway, you might be going halfway, taking a little break, and making the other half. Okay? And when folks feel that they have that ability to do that, and they feel more comfortable, they feel safer, they're more likely to be a pedestrian and make that crossing versus, you know what, I'm never going to be able to make it across before that green light goes off and the red light starts flashing. So part of this is about safety, and part of it is about the perception of safety as well, and comfort. Here's another one of my favorite ones that looks kind of like a familiar streetscape to many of us in T-Ticket. Here's a complete streets design that moves the traffic and the pedestrians and the cyclists. We have protected turning lanes. Don't need a complete travel lane there on the far left, so we got some new trees, some green space. Also, not to get too much into the weeds here, but between these two trees, you can see that there's some catchment. There's some basins there. There's some ways that we can deal with storm water runoff that can help with some of the nitrification of our ponds as well along this corridor, rather than just dumping everything into these easements like we have it over by T-Ticket Path, where everything is just sort of thrown into an easement, and then all of that stuff ends up under the road and back out into the little pond. Transit users. Some of you may remember across from Family Foods, we now have the Arthur Ravisa Senior Transit Stop. Doug is here. Doug actually built that. Thank you, Doug. Under contract with the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority. But you know, when we were talking about this corridor, you don't think a lot about public transit necessarily until you are standing in someone's front yard and they're talking about people on their porch in the rain waiting for the bus. Why is that? Well, because it was raining, and there's a transit stop on 28 in T-Ticket, and they were trying to get out of the rain, so they ran up on, frequently, not just once, on folks' front porches. So the opportunity for us to look at this and say, well, where along this corridor might there be these little kiosks that have a synergy like the one in the East Falmouth Village has? We have the children are going to their school bus stop out there, and we have the RTA general transportation stop there. And then the students that go to the charter school use that RTA stop. So we kind of got like a street for that one little transit stop. And so this is something that we're looking at going forward as well, and get folks out of people's front yards, off of their front porches in the rain, and figuring out where are the best spots to be able to have the transit users access the network. So our starting point, you all were, or well, pretty much all of you were at the first hearing. Preliminary designs were, two 11-foot travel lanes, 2-foot fog lines on either side, 2-foot buffers on either side of that, and a full 8-foot multi-use path on either side of that. So that's sort of where the dialogue began. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put up the preliminary design plans that have come out of the work that the committee did and scroll through the corridor and kind of look at that section by section and answer questions that you might have that are specific to areas. And you'll see on those plans that when we walked out there, we found stands of trees that were in good condition. And how do we shrink a path, shift an angle to be able to preserve some of that? And in other areas where things weren't so well, we take these trees down and let's plant again, let's put something new in this area. So before we go into that actual plan, I want to know if there's any general. We take some general comments, general questions, and then I'll pull up the other plans.
Anything at this point? Vicky?
Have we been able to get rid of the utility poles that might be in the way?
The question was whether we've been able to get rid of the utility poles that were in the way. So the short answer is not easily. The longer answer is on the south side, there actually were very few. They were mostly just support poles that can be moved easily. On the north side, that was one of the constraints that made the path slightly narrower. It would have, well, I think in general, it's still under discussion, but for the purposes of this plan, we've assumed that the majority on the north side are remaining. But I think there's still, there was definitely interest on the committee to investigate burying the utilities in general while we're at it, basically.
I
But
didn't mean just burying, but just trying
Just
to move them
moving.
so they're not right in the middle of the path.
yeah, no, they won't be right in the middle of the path, for sure. Yeah, we've either worked around them or they'll be moved. Yeah. Sorry? Oh, 48 have to, oh, okay. I hear that 48 have to be moved. So I guess there is a lot more movement than I anticipated. Okay. and then, oh, sorry, yeah, Leonard.
At one of the previous meetings, I made some comment about bringing Elm Trees back to T-Ticket Highway. I'm pleased to see you're both nodding your heads. But most people who, and it was before my time, but when David was talking about putting in the sidewalks, apparently there was a corridor of elm trees all the way along T-Ticket Highway, and they were not removed because they died of Dutch elm disease. They were removed because the state wanted to widen the highway and put in the sidewalks. So when we at the 300 committee were working on putting trees on T-Ticket Park, we read Raleigh Costa's wonderful book about T-Ticket, and he talks about the elm trees. And so we put 23 elm trees in there, and I can tell you they're thriving. And I hope that this is an opportunity to bring, I'm partial to elm trees, but people are partial to other kinds of trees. Bringing those trees back, this is an opportunity to bring more trees back along that roadway.
Great. So for those of you who maybe couldn't hear, the comment was that Route 28 along T-Ticket Highway used to be lined with elm trees, and those they didn't die of Dutch elm disease as so many did, but they were actually removed to widen the highway. So it's this gentleman's hope that this be seen as an opportunity to bring elm and probably other trees back as well. And we absolutely agree with that, and we did really push for that, for landscaping, for really creating that LA look, you know, where you have kind of trees lining like you saw in some of those after photos, and that the DPW and the engineers will be consulting with landscape architects who can advise on a type of native and you know, species that can thrive in what is not an ideal types of condition, with salt, exhaust fumes, you know, tires, people driving over their routes, etc. But that's very much the intent, is to really boost the landscaping from what's there now, including hopefully elm trees. So yeah, thanks for that comment. Yes, sir.
Frank Howard. I just want to say thank you guys for all your hard work, but I just want to make sure that our elected town officials realize that this is what is supposed to happen every time we have a project like this. And while it's happening now, this is very late in the stage of a project like this. This is something that should have happened year and a half, 2 years ago. And I would expect that since everyone's been educated on the process for public involvement, that going forward, that this is going to happen. Whether it's the elected officials or the people that we pay to actually do this job, it is your job to make sure this process goes correctly.
Okay, thank you. So that was a comment about saying thank you to the committee for the work we've done, but that this type of participation should have happened much earlier in the process, and hopefully elected officials and staff are hearing that and will apply that to future projects. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, what type of plantings will they be using besides trees as buffers for properties that are closer to the road?
So the question was, what type of plantings will be used other than trees for properties that are closer to the road? I don't have the specifics, but we envision shrubs, you know, that could be used for screening from some of the houses that have the, you know, are really close in. Beyond that, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that we've gotten down to the specifics either about what will be planted in the generally 2 foot buffer, whether it's just grass or something that doesn't require maintenance. But yeah. And I think, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm guessing that homeowners could have some input into that, particularly if it's like to screen your house along a particular section. But I think the idea would be to come up with a menu of trees that would, and shrubs and so forth, that would do well in these conditions. Yes, ma'am.
I missed the former meetings. It's not possible then just to do one side of the road. You know, I live in Falmouth Court, so a little bit off, but it just seems such a shame to make it all look new and like other towns, not characteristic of Falmouth. It has to be on both sides. It can't just be an access on one side. And can the plantings be large so it doesn't look new? It's just gonna look so different.
So the question was whether we need this access on both sides of the road versus just one side, and would it look too kind of new and different? The problem with having it only on one side, of course, is that forces a lot of road crossings of people who live or coming from one side or the other, and we're trying to, cut down on that because that just increases the dangers, basically, and the inconvenience for drivers having to stop. Dave, do you want to speak more to the aesthetics since you're from there?
I don't know what stage of development the plants will be when they're brought in for planning, so that's beyond my pay grade.
But just in general, in terms of it looking different, or?
Yeah, it will look different. And having grown up in T-Ticket, I want it to look different. I want to see the trees come back. I want to see more green space. I hope the community wants it to be that way as well. I mean, is there anybody here that wants to see more concrete and asphalt in T-Ticket? I've seen enough of it over the course of my lifetime. So it's going to be different. But I think as we go forward and do those choices of what it looks like in the buffer zone and what types of trees are being planted, and that we look at the maturity of those types of plants, so that we get a sense, okay, we plant this tree now, what's it going to look like in 10 years? I think those are important steps that'll be 3-4 years down the road. Once we get, we got to get on the TIP plan, we got to get the funding available, we got to get to 75% design, and we're at a conceptual design stage right now, but it will look different, and I'm hoping it does.
Yeah.
John Alves, Precinct 3, T-Ticket Highway. I've had a number of concerned people ask me about the business signs that are on the road between Mira Vista, Falmouth Lumber. How far back do they have to put their new signs for planning purposes back from the road or from the bike path so it doesn't interfere with the bike path? Because after 50 years of signs there, the road has changed somewhat. And the reason they're asking me is because they would like to know, and some cannot make it here, or where the plans are, or on Thursday night, or because of the traffic night lights, they can't attend the meetings. So then they come to the town meeting member to see if he knows. And I don't know, because I have a number of signs on T-Ticket Highway, and I want to know, for my planning purposes and their planning purposes, how far back they have to move on to their actual property.
Okay, so.
So I think, Mr. House, so I think what we need to do is for the individuals that
Just repeat the
have that concern. The question was about how far back do you have to put your business sign under the preliminary concept here.
Because
You'd have to be outside.
almost,
You'd have to be outside of where the. So let me give you an example right here. On the north side of this schematic, we show a 6-foot reduced path rather than the 8-foot path, and a 2-foot buffer. So you've got 8 feet from the edge of the roadway to where the edge of the bike path would be. And then from there back, the regulation for the signage, is there an additional, can somebody help me if there's additional regulation for signage to be outside of that? Or is the 8 feet?
Street,
Yeah.
street signage, regulatory signage will be in that, edge
In
of
the buffer,
road.
yeah,
Road.
no, we're talking about business
But
signage.
business signs will be behind behind the shared use.
Okay, so it would be 8 foot on the north side, on this corridor, and that would carry itself all the way down to where the Fountain Columbia Yard is. Because we propose from there down a 6-foot path rather than an 8-foot path. And then on the south side here, there are some changes as we go further east, but there's 8 foot and 2, so that would be 10 foot off of the edge of the roadway.
But But I would say don't do anything yet, like that they'll receive guidance from the DPW, is that right, Peter? Can I, when we get to that point, they'll receive guidance, but generally it'll be about 8 to 10 feet, maybe a little more off the edge of the road.
Because some of those signs have been up for 50 years.
Yeah,
And it does cause them a problem because the sign is permitted by the town for that piece of property.
So we can help get the actual plot plans for individual businesses if they want to reach out. We've got them all available, so we can sit down. with
Where are
them.
they located?
Well, they were just emailed to me this week because they're just completed. So are we online yet with these?
We are not.
Not yet. So we'll have them on the website at some point. We'll pop them up there, but they're available for town.
there's no rush to review the signs.
Representative, I have just a follow-up question for you. You mentioned the status of that memo from the 50s that says the state is not responsible for maintaining the sidewalks. I'm looking at this, and I think it's a good plan so far, but we're tripling or maybe quadrupling the amount of space that needs to be plowed or sanded or taken care of just in terms of the actual walkways. Who's going to do it? How much is extra is it going to cost? If the state's not going to do it, then why are we complying with their requirements?
Well,
Or
can
can we use
the
it as
requirements
a-
of it is we can't do anything with it.
All right.
That's just law. Who's going to do it? Well, right now, we're doing it on the Public Works Department is doing it because of our assuming the liability of the border currently. When we can work out that transition, not sure yet, but again, we're 4 or 5 years out on this project to this level. And so hopefully within the next couple of years, we can get some agreements as to who's going to assume that and whether, right now, we've got, some of these sidewalks are worth plowing, and some of them aren't, quite frankly.
The current ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Many of you have been down to this corridor, right? I mean, there's telephone poles in the middle of sidewalks. You can't walk around them, you can't plow around them, you can't bring a wheelchair, you can't do anything. It's just, there's poles in the middle of the sidewalk. It's crazy. But it's a good point that we have to monitor that going forward, making sure that we're able to maintain what we construct in cooperation with the state. So we want to scroll through here, start looking. So the preliminary design, again, starting over by the T-Ticket, what do they call it, school administration building. I was going to call it the elementary school, but it's not that anymore. That's where my dad went to elementary school. So we got the 6-foot corridor, and what happened there was, when we got out there, we walked and we looked at how tight that was and how close the residents were in many of those areas. We needed to do as much constricting as possible. And we figured with a 6-foot path, we would make the preferred connector on the south side being the 8-foot path. So if you're riding a bicycle and you're trying to get to the center of town, you come into where the Mara Vista extension is, and you have the opportunity at a signalized crossing to go to the south side, get on the 8-foot multimodal path, and continue through the corridor into the village of T-Ticket and into the center of town. And then being able to continue to have pedestrian traffic on the north side as tight as possible, where we could still get the state to sign off on the fact that we were upgrading and we were trying to continue to have some type of foot traffic on the north side. That's not to say that folks are going to stay on their bike all the way through. That very well could happen. But the idea is to try to direct them to the areas where they have these signalized crossings and they have a safer way to get to the primary path within that corridor, which would be on the south side. So we give you an example here, like retain tree, right? I mean, we literally went out and marked the tree. The DPW went out and marked the trees beforehand. We went out and looked at the trees, and then we went out there with the tape measures and we were measuring how much these paths would encroach. So here you see, instead of just being a 2-foot buffer, coming right through and wiping out one of these old historic trees, we've actually gone through, the engineers have gone through the grading requirements of Mass DOT, and we're very slowly meandering this path around the back, creating a slightly larger buffer zone, and going to preserve one of the trees that is actually worth preserving. There's some rotten trees out there that aren't. let's see how the transition goes. Now, I know folks in the room live in various areas across here. If you want me to stop and to zoom in on a particular area, and then we can have some questions answered too as well. Yeah.
At the very beginning, back the other way,
Yeah.
across the first entrance.
At the T-Ticket School? I mean, at the administration building? Yeah.
I'm across from there at 347, and I just measured before I came out here, compared to my property, it's 11 feet from the clock. How does that affect that?
Okay, so here's your front yard right here. Okay. You've got some boulders on the right-hand side. You have a concrete retaining wall. Is that correct? Okay. So if you look up at the 8-foot, laser pointer. So right here would be the 8-foot multimodal path. That's an existing hydrant right there. Correct? I'm going to look at the engineers because I'm not an engineer. So that's the hydrant in the corner of your property there.
Yes.
And then there's the 2-foot vegetated buffer. That's the 2-foot between the fog line and the edge of the curb. So let's see, you've got, here's your driveway right here. What is this, EOQ? Edge of pavement, okay. So there's the edge of pavement in your driveway. And so that's the preliminary design concept right there. The path would end basically where your driveway pavement sort of splays out currently. And the sidewalk is.
So it doesn't intend to come into my property? Right.
That's, yeah. See, what was interesting for us, particularly in some front yards where neighbors met us, is when we actually got to this level of pulling out the tape measure and looking at the trees, some folks actually ended up with an extra foot or 2 feet of grass in their front yard than they did from the original, just sort of general concept design. So here we are thinking, oh boy, here we are, you know, we're taking people's front yards. How much of the front yard are we going to take? And in some of these areas, we're just redesigning what's in your front yard, where the sidewalk is now, and now you've got a little green buffer over there, and you're going to have that 8-foot thing. And in other cases, you might end up with an extra 6, 8, 10 inches of yard, and in some cases, you might lose 6, 8, or 10 inches. But so yeah, that's the current preliminary design for your front yard.
Craig Howard again. Was there any conversation about decreasing the speed limit? Just before the school, I think the speed
So
limit.
there's only one way that we can decrease or change speed limits, and that's under Chapter 90 of the Massachusetts General Laws. That requires that a speed survey be done by the Department of Transportation. And under the current regulatory environment, unfortunately, it's an 85, right? Yeah, the 80. Yeah, 85. So there's an 85% target of the survey that's done, and that sets the speed limit. In most areas where I've had constituents ask me to bring Mass DOT in to do these speed surveys, they've raised the speed limit. So we can't just set a speed limit based on what we think it should be. There's this bureaucratic thing that we've been trying to change, and the city of Boston got a little carve out for some of the alleyways and stuff in Boston, but you have to actually go through this survey, and in many cases you end up upping the speed limits rather than lowering them in the areas. So we can't arbitrarily set that. However, what we can do is we can create environmental designs which end up slowing down and calming the movement of the traffic. At which case, if we find that to be successful, we could do a speed survey and maybe it would set the new speed limit. So some of these intersections and straightaways and things like that, some of that design work can be done in such a way that reduces the speed. Also, on the highways, you see that they come out all the time and they clear all of the trees on the side of the highways. So when you have those open vistas, traffic travels more comfortably at higher rates of speed. You put enough elm trees in there, and that's going to naturally slow people down because just the visual perception when you're driving, when you're in that type of environment, will calm traffic movement by planting trees on the side of the road.
Well, along what Frank said, and you clarified about the speed limit, but if you have pedestrians, crosswalks, bikes, and you have all this around not just the administration building, of course, but you do have a lot going on, are you permitted to put speed tables in there, or is that like?
No, we won't be able to put speed tables on the 28 corridor. another example here, or actually not another, that's returning to the example of how we went around the tree. And here's another one after Claudia Lane, again. Again, making, yeah?
Yeah, it's
Yep.
my house.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to kind of visualize because my driveway, I think that's the big drive
Right here?
is the indication for the driveway.
Yep. Edge of
The layout
pavement right
is,
here.
you know, to the left side of the grass is where you get where the mouse is, where you. So I'm just trying to figure out like that line where it says grass, is that my actual like front yard? I mean, what I'm trying to visualize is my yard going to be pushed back a little and then out again, so it's going to be like a dip of a curve, instead of kind of just like how you walk right now, everybody's kind of have like a straight arc. Nothing's going in and out.
Dave, let me just,
Yeah.
if I can just,
The dip in the yard.
let me just clarify a couple things just to make reading the plan easier, because most of us are not engineers. So the gray, the sort of faded out gray is existing conditions. So whatever you see over what it says grass, that's what you've got now in your yard.
Right.
And then the series of lines, let's see, can I do this with a mouse? And forgive me, Dave, if you already did this and I missed it, but I know you explained this is the edge of the roadway, so we've got 11-foot travel lanes, then we've got the 2-foot fog line area, basically, then a raised curb, then basically a 2-foot buffer, then the 8-foot multi-use path, and then this line that goes all along here is the edge of the state right-of-way, but we're not coming that far. Like, just to be clear, that the darkest black line here, that's the 8-foot thing here, that's the path that we're doing. This is just to show you where the right-of-way is that we're not using all of. Does that help at all, or?
It does.
Okay.
I was just trying to figure out the.
Yeah.
Anyway, so none of us are engineers, and we're putting all these, you know.
Do you like that tree in the front yard, though? Is it all right if we keep that tree?
I love the tree.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Yeah, we try to keep that tree.
One
if we
happy
could.
I'm here for the tree.
David raised an issue when he was talking about traffic quieting, and I was wondering, the trees would do that, but is there any place where the layout is suitable to using the whole layout, where you could put in like a traffic quieting? Some of the pictures you showed had the plantings in the middle of between the two lanes. Is there any way to design that and just into that stretch of road and just?
So you're talking about like the boulevard where they have the separated lanes?
Yeah, it wouldn't be the whole thing, but there might be some parts where you could do a,
At this point, we hadn't recommended any of that type of common device.
because it can work really well and if you travel around different places to see how they quieted traffic with some.
But it's a balance again. We want to slow them down enough for folks to be comfortable on the corridor, but we want them to go quick enough to get to where they need to go that they don't not use the corridor, particularly for our businesses that are on the corridor.
I love the design, and I like the conversation about how we can use the design to slow down traffic. One of the things I notice a lot, especially if we're going to have a lot more people walking, biking, handicapped people on this road, and this might not be this committee, in fact it probably isn't, how are we going to redirect the rigs, the 18-wheelers that are walking down this road, or can we? There's other routes that they probably could use that are more efficient. They use this one a lot. If we're making it a public transit, we probably don't want 18-wheelers going up all down the road.
Yeah, I mean, so our committee wasn't charged, nor did we look at trying to change that type of behavior, commercial behavior. But I think that's a conversation going forward that could be had by those that are using the corridor for commercial reasons.
I know it's just outside of your purview, but is there any chance that the roundabout is still being considered at the end of Sandwich Road? That might slow traffic.
At the end of Sandwich Road. So that was just before our charge. So, Ray, do you want to talk about that briefly? Just the current design concept for the end of Sandwich Road?
The roundabout, for all intents and purposes, really didn't satisfy the fundamental issue. And that would have been the level of service at that intersection during peak hours, and actually could exacerbate the problem by creating more backups, because Right now, your queue is either going to be on Sandwich Road or 28, one or the other, but it's a straight line of traffic. If you were to put a roundabout at that particular intersection, given the level of traffic that we have there now, then you would not only have the long lines on Sandwich Road and 28, but you would also fill the lanes within the roundabout, so it would make it even more difficult.
Slides out.
Here's the intersection with Mara Vista and Homestead. Yep.
So is there no left lane?
No additional turn lanes in the design. Yes, sir.
On that, Fairwest Avenue extension, it's not clear from the drawing, although I think it could be, but there are people coming west, north, whatever it is, that turning onto the extension are really kind of going in a different direction than a straight north, south, east, west turn. So they're free to come across the line, or people waiting to cross over Homestead Lane.
So you're talking about here coming west and then coming
Yes,
south?
and down in there, and people coming south turn and also cut across into the lane. So any improvement that could be made there to widen the Fairwest Avenue extension of size of road in that corner would be very helpful. I mean, pedestrians, not that there are many there this time, nonetheless have to be very careful and try to adjust. It's not an easy corner to navigate from coming off of 28 other directions down onto this Avenue extension. I don't know if it's noticed or what it is, but the way the road is constructed, it isn't quite an easy left turn.
Yeah, so there's concern here about the traffic coming here, turning down, actually cutting the edge.
And also because of the way the corner is configured, if you notice from the right, you're not making a square corner, you're actually hitting a little more than it might even.
If you could just inform that, from my understanding, that intersection, other than some massaging of the sidewalks, the intersection is not going to get changed, from what I understand. So our charge is from the intersection either way. So
One of the things we did talk a little bit about was sort of the curb cutting and bringing that, as we saw in the Complete Streets designs, some of those things are squared off for pedestrians to decrease the crossing distance, but that also calms the traffic at the corner, because now the traffic has to come through whatever structural planting is happening where the corners are. But for the most part, the big takeaway on this intersection was there aren't additional lanes. We're not taking large swaths of front yards to put turn lanes. That was some discussion at one point, but that's not in the works anymore.
Additional studies, earlier studies and concept plans dating back last year and 2 years before that showed left turn lanes in both directions from Route 28. And my understanding is, sort of a knee-jerk reaction in my opinion, that no hope of improving this intersection has been included in the current plan because it's more of a congestion issue rather than a safety issue. Well, I would say less congestion is probably more safety. Having lived in this area for quite a while, and this is probably this is the controlled intersection that I use the most. The best improvement for this would be to add a right turn lane from Mara Vista Avenue extension onto 28 South. That would not do anything about widening the road. Now on the north side, it's town-owned land on both sides of Homestead Lane, and I think there is room for a slight bump on both sides to the north to accommodate lesser left turn lanes than had previously been suggested. Maybe only a left turn lane for 2, perhaps 3 cars, and a turn left onto Mara Vista Avenue. Maybe only for 1 car, if at all, to go from 28 onto Homestead. But none of that would impact any existing lawns. It would improve safety, it could square that intersection better, improve congestion, and I think we're overlooking a good opportunity to make an improvement here. In phases 1 and 2, congestion and safety changes are proposed for a number of intersections. I don't think it's personal, but again, I'll say I think it's a knee-jerk reaction to take out of the plan for this section any idea of improving the functioning of this intersection.
So we'll Mark, continuing to look at the squaring of the intersection and bring it up on Thursday night. Here we go. We've got a tree there that we're going to remove. That one wasn't in such good condition. Take a path. There's an area where there's existing guardrails, and we talked about the types of fix of the guardrails, and actually potentially installing what would be a fence with a guardrail behind it, so that it would look more like a fence than a guardrail. Yep. So this area where the guardrail is, you see here when you get down, just before you go down the hill, going down towards Falmouth Lumberyard, which would be on the left, but on the right-hand side, over by where the Domino's Pizza is, in the storage facility back in there. There's a guardrail there, so we talked about how to extend the safety benefits of the guardrail and then to be able to separate the path. Very tight area there where that hill comes down, so there would need to be some fill, and then we're looking to separate the path. Yeah, right now it's a steel, you can see the pre-existing condition here is a steel guardrail. We're talking about a post rail fence. And this actually was one of the areas where the neighbors were actually with us in the front yard, and we had the tape measures, and we were able to talk about how this extension could happen from the existing guardrail structure through the front yard. This is also one of the houses where folks were waiting in the rain. So there's the opportunity here for some type of a transit locale for folks that are going to be getting on the bus. But also in that area, there's some big boulders in the front yard because vehicles have crossed into the house through the front yard there. And so by having this guardrail as a physical divider allows that property owner to make sure that those cars that have ended up in the house don't end up in the house again. Again, here we are, we're still 6 foot on the north, coming through the corridor of the Falmouth Lumberyard. This was an interesting learning experience for many of us. This lane, which appeared to be just a turning lane for folks to get into OBrien hardware, was designed much more than that. Mr. Augusta years ago worked with the state to be able to work on some staging issues relative to vehicles, the large delivery trucks coming into the lumberyard. And so we're continuing to look at that area to figure out what's the best way to be able to have that safety movement of that traffic, those trucks, and to make sure that as they cross whatever multi-use path we have, we limit as much interaction with the cyclists and the pedestrians as possible, so it's safer for the folks on foot, on bike, and also for those in the trucks making the deliveries. Yeah.
Mr. Roger Augusta is filmed. Could you zoom into where the entrance is to Falmouth Lumber, so I can see if there's any concern with the curb cuts?
Yeah, so there's no changing of any of the curb cut area. So the setback of the 2 foot buffer off of the fog line here shows that 8 foot path, the 8-foot path would begin on the opposite side of your entrance to the lumberyard, and then the 8-foot path would continue off towards East Falmouth. So we're showing a potential...
The little island, I believe, is there. There's a telephone pole right in the middle.
Yeah, right there. It's a utility pole 9-6 something.
Where's that going to go?
Yeah. That's one of the 40 some odd. Where's that one's going? It's going there. So can we get a little more...
Is it going to go back further onto the property?
I don't know.
We haven't looked at all the specifics yet, but
Okay.
there are a number that are gonna have to move out of the path, one direction or the other.
There's a pole right in that little island.
Yeah, so it's right there in the island, right there. And so, maybe, do you want to keep it in the island and just move it off the corner? Or move the whole island?
Well, it's not going to interfere with the 8-foot path?
Well, so right now, it's actually on the edge of the design layout of the 8-foot path. So we need to have a 2-foot, Ray, is that correct? 2 foot? 3 foot, okay. So they want, I guess, 3 foot from the edge of a pathway to a structure like a utility pole. So a potential 3-foot setback would bring it to the northern edge of what is now your little island there. So that's something, obviously. Yeah. The other option we can have here as we go forward is we can discuss, do we take what is 6 and bring 6 further up? Not start 8 right at the other, we were going to do it right at the other, sort of have your driveway be sort of the natural delineation between 8 and 6. But we could potentially look at going further east before we go up to the 8, bring the 6, which would leave that pole outside of a 6-foot path. So let's continue to have this discussion on this piece of property. And if you can also, when we go across the hall, make some notes on that as well, because either we could try to do that 6, we could look at going further north with the pole. So there's a couple of options we have there. So that starts the 8-foot path on the north side. And here was an area that was concern on the initial plans too, where we had some, the parking right up along the edge, and so now we're looking at, we're still able to put that 8-foot path on the north side and still be outside of the front edge of where this was, what's called East End Tap now, used to be J.R. Brody's. Instead of going all the way into the parking lot, where they're able to retain the same amount of parking, and we're still able to squinch in our 8-foot northern side path.
Would you mind zeroing in on 768 T-Ticket Highway and the house and the apartment building that's on the corner of
Yep.
Susan Lane?
768. 760.
Right there, it's Carlos Martino, it's now owned by Joseph Augusta. Right on the left of the street. If you wouldn't mind moving it more to the lot before on the left.
Yep.
It's be the corner of Susan Lane, the apartment building there. That front porch.
Yes. So here we are, look at this, we went back to 6 here, because this is really tight, as you know. So this northern line here would be the layout, the state, right-of-way layout. This would be the path. We actually looked at this area as to whether or not to shift within the existing layout, to shift the road south to be able to gain the space here. And then when we looked at the actual shifting of the road to gain the 2 feet, it was easier for us to put a design concept of go to 6-foot path rather than try to shift the center line of Route 28 2 feet south to get the extra 2 feet. So we're actually suggesting that we cut back to 6 feet rather than the 8 feet in this area to get through this little section here, and that way we don't have to shift the center line of the road, and we'll retain the front. So that's...
What's the distance after the 6-foot mark?
Yep.
Where it says wooden deck, and is that solid line? That's the actual road layout?
No, the road, so that's the, well, the right of way. That,
The top line is
yeah.
the road layout.
That's the road, right of way there, yeah. And that, I don't have an exact number there, but I'm gonna say it's probably about 3 feet.
David,
About 3 feet. Yep.
I'm just missing something
Yep.
because I'm confused, because these homes, I know for a fact, 768 was built in 1924, which was before the layout of Route 28. And so the property lines, I'm just confused in regards to, you say the state layout.
So the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has a legal right-of-way up to this line
Okay.
in East Falmouth. And has for my lifetime, I don't know exactly when the current layout was done. What was it? 1928. So for my generation and my parents' generation, the state has had legal right-of-way up to that point on this corridor.
So the home that was built at 768 in 1924, when they took the land at that point, the layout?
I think what's confusing my
You're talking about this structure or the structure next to it? This structure?
I'm not sure, the one right there.
Because there was a lot of concern about this, and it's not even on the map, it's so far back. We had a lot of people that were like worried about this house, and it's so far back that, as you notice, the structure doesn't even make it on our map. So it's way outside of the layout.
But I just know for a fact that particular house, where the boundaries are, because my son just bought it less than a year ago.
Yeah. And the structure is way outside of the right-of-way.
Okay.
So this is it. This is the driveway right here.
Yep.
And so you could see the edge of pavement already on the existing sidewalk. So we are taking a 6-foot multi-use path, laying it over what is the existing sidewalk. Legally, the Commonwealth still has access between the edge of that path and that line. And we're not doing anything with the rest of that property.
So what's confusing a lot of people, I believe, is after the 6-foot mark there, the rest of the property that still lies the edge of the highway is not going to be used. It's going to continue being part of our property.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Doesn't change at all.
Yeah. There's still a legal easement on it, but it's, yeah, that's your property.
So we left as is.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we could have come in another 8 feet and put a 2-foot buffer, but guess what? We didn't. What we did is we went right along with the existing sidewalk. And this is where it gets so exciting for me, having been to the first couple of meetings to see what was happening with the plan, to get down to the point where we're saying, oh, wait a minute, you mean to tell me that I'm actually going to be able to keep that 2 feet, 3 feet? Absolutely. And guess what? The pavement's right there now, all that broken pavement. This is going to be the new clean 6-foot path right there.
Okay, thank you.
It's amazing what you can do when you get these little pads and you get right in there and you make some decisions and you look at hypersensitive details. So good, I'm glad we could answer that question. Anything else on this area? Yes, sir.
Hi, Dave. Paul Pendleton, East End Path. Come back 1 second. You have the 6-foot pathway just east, and then down at Falmouth Lumber, also 6 foot.
Yeah.
And first off, I appreciate from the original plans what has gone on here. It hasn't taken any of the parking, which would have been a problem.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, I have a sign, which is important to the business, located right there. And I know you might not have the answer to this, but I don't want to lose additional parking to have to move that sign back. And my question is, is there a thought that you could just continue the 6 foot pathway between,
Edge of pavement.
I don't know if you can see it there. It's,
Vinyl fence. Where's the sign?
SN1.
SN1? Yeah, your sign's outside of the right of way.
Yeah, SN1. It's outside, so that'll be allowed to remain that close.
Yeah, that's your sign, you can keep it there.
Well, the post goes up, the sign feels like it might be over the walkway.
We kind of looked at that planter too, so we didn't have to relocate that planter. That whole planter's outside.
Yeah, is there vinyl fence?
Well, fantastic. Again, I appreciate this plan compared to what I saw originally.
You're concerned that the actual width of the sign in and of itself might encroach onto
Yeah,
the walkway.
that was my
That's the plan we have.
And being asked to move it back into the lot, which,
Where it says vinyl fence?
Yeah, right
Green
there.
vinyl.
Yeah, so we might have to work a few inches on the sign placement there, but it would be outside of the, it would be outside of the path definitely. And even currently, the main structure that is anchored there is outside of the right-of-way itself. So we might have to do something for a couple of inches, I don't know. But I'll have to go back and look, I didn't see. So it overhangs.
I'll make a note of it when you're.
Okay.
So that's-
Yeah. But we did, when we got there, we looked at that and we went through that, as Jim was just mentioning. We were looking at that, the planner and everything, and how do we get through here? And
David?
Yeah, yes, sir.
I'd like to remind you, for the Falmouth Lumber and Abishon, you have the King Phillips Historical District that runs completely across the street out of town-owned property, the old Augusta property, out of there all the way to Perch Pond Road, through the back side of all the businesses there. So planning will have, that's a very busy intersection. I just wanted to bring that up because not many people know where the King Philip Ravine is, and it is a historical site.
All right.
What did he ask?
About a King Philip historical site layout behind the businesses in that strip. So we've got one more section here, and then we'll be able to go to the, actually, I guess there's 2 more sections. And then we'll be able to go to the prints across the hall that you can write your comments on there. So what do we got here? This is Cedar Meadows Drive. So we got 6 coming in, and then 8 to the east. And then this brings us down to the Oxbow Road, which was the end of the section of the charge of the committee. One of the things that I noticed standing at the top of the hill at the end of the day, and I want to give a quick shout out to Sheriff Cummings, who during our site visit donated a van for us to be able to get transported along the corridor. But he also came and ended up being the driver himself. So we had a little celebrity driver, and he was with us for the afternoon. But when we got there and got ready to start heading back towards the school administration building on the north side, we looked down and pretty much saw no houses or structures along the south side of what would be this 8-foot path. And I looked down and I see the Raleigh-Costa Bridge going over the Coonamessett River, and I think, gee, just on the other side of that street begins the new Coonamessett River Greenway corridor. And wouldn't it be nice as an additional discussion that our community could have is to take that multi-use path and just go down to the bottom of the hill and have a signalized connection where the children from T-Ticket and at this elementary school could have a safe means of transport to get to the Greenway, to be able to use that resource for educational purposes and recreational purposes, and then for us to continue to work for the children in East Falmouth to be able to get them from the East Falmouth Elementary School back to that corridor. So that was just something that went on in my mind when I stood at the top of the hill and looked down and said, gee, I know we're supposed to stop here, but if we just go a little bit further, we can connect this whole resource to the village.
That's the John Parker Road intersection.
I would certainly say keep that thought. Because my question is, what does the ending look like? One of the worst things is to suddenly be transitioned into non-protected kind of riding area, particularly at that point on 28.
Yeah, I'm going to have to defer to the Department of Public Works on that. I know that there is a lot of buffer, a lot of hard top along that way, so does that look like one of those, the shared use where you're back right up along the road? I don't know exactly, but this is where we were charged to about face and make our way to the north side.
But we agree with you.
So the path is a shared bike path and walking path the entire length in the corridor? And what's the surface likely to be on that path? Asphalt, concrete?
Asphalt.
Asphalt.
So across the hall, we have each of these sections that we scrolled through. We have them printed out. They're on tables. There's Post-it notes, as Allison said. There's some general sheets for comments. If you'd like to go in and look at your piece of property or an area that's of interest and concern to you along this corridor and make some comments there. Those will all be collected at the end of the day today. They'll be brought to our meeting on Thursday night. We'll throw up this little graphic again, and we'll zoom right into these spots, and we'll try to address those questions and answer those concerns at our meeting on Thursday, and then the committee will decide what, if any, additional recommendations we need to make in order for the plans to be finalized as conceptual, and then to move forward in the DOT process.
If you could just make a note that there's going to be just kind of a protective, it's going to be a granite curbing along this whole project. So it gives you a little bit of barrier from pedestrians, bicycles from the road. It's not foolproof, but right now they could just wander off into the greenery and get a bicycle.
Good point. If I hadn't mentioned that, John is bringing up that along the corridor here, where you see the end of there's the fog line, there's that 2-foot buffer, before you get to the actual vegetated buffer, there will be curb there. Where in most of this corridor now there is no curb. As one other layer of protection to separate, but also it'll help us in the design with the stormwater runoff and how we direct those in the appropriate areas. Alison, do you need to?
Just,
especially the street text.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming out and all your comments, and we will all be across the way along with the engineers, so do please come join us. And Thursday night we'll be having our meeting, so thanks a lot.